Hello and welcome to Call to the Workforce. I'm your host, Emily Chipman. Today we have with us Misty Bastian, and she's going to be talking about three significant topics, including what to do if you make a mistake at work, the importance of career flexibility, and how leveraging her talents professionally has brought her joy. Misty, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Emily. It's great to be here.
I want to introduce you to everyone listening. Misty received an undergraduate degree in communications and received a master's in education focusing on arts from Harvard. She has volunteered as an ESL instructor, worked as the director of communications at Jamberry, and worked for several years as a senior consultant for strategic communications and project management at companies including Booz, Hamilton, and Acuity. In her current role as Director of Global Philanthropy at Doterra, she oversees the day-to-day operations of the Doterra Healing Hounds Foundation. In recent years, she partnered with Hope Humanitarian to provide aid and basic needs such as food, fuel, and hygiene kits to Syrian refugees, impacting at least 2,000 people. She has volunteered at church in roles with the women's group as the president, in the children's Sunday school as a music leader, and in the presidency as a counselor for the teenage girls youth group. Before we jump into today's episode, I thought it would be good to just start on a light note. I was reminded of a 2021 news story where an HBO Max intern accidentally sent out a test email to all of the HBO subscribers. And pretty quickly, the Twitterverse started supporting this person. And I thought, in light of the fact that we're going to be talking about mistakes or challenges that we have at work, that it might be good to start on just a humorous note. One of the people who responded was actually Monica Lewinsky, and she sent this message. She said, "Dear intern, it gets better. P.S. Don't wear a beret for a while." HBO Max tweeted this: "We mistakenly sent out an empty test email to a portion of our HBO Max mailing list this evening. Yes, it was the intern. No, really. And we're helping them through it." Another individual said they once globally took down Spotify. And then one woman, I could not even believe this, and I was a little horrified when I read it. She said, "I was using my desktop calendar to make a monthly note of when I started my menstrual period. But after several months, I realized I was making that note on a calendar I shared with all of my colleagues company-wide. I was 37 years old." So we all have these moments, and professionally, there's a range of mistakes that we can make. Everything from the intern sending that accidental message out to everybody, to that moment where you think, do I have to resign? I would call it the big doozy. And there are a lot of dynamics that affect the outcome, including who your boss is, how much or how little you're responsible for the scenario. There was another story that someone had shared, and I thought this highlighted the impact that it can have depending on who your boss is. This was also a response to that situation. Somebody mentioned that they had created a spreadsheet that assigned everybody they worked with to a Muppet. And they said, my boss, who they had labeled as Beaker, wanted to have them fired. And I believe their managers or the people who owned the company, who were like Bert and Ernie, were just totally fine with it. So certainly every scenario is different. It depends on who you're working for and what the scenario is. But today, Misty is going to talk to us about the big doozy. What do you do if there is a really significant thing that happens? And we're not going to get into too much of the detail, but Misty's going to share enough to give you an idea of the scenario and then talk about what principles we can take from this. Misty, can you share with us your moment?
Yes, I would love to, I guess. Sometimes talking about it still brings on that. I don't know if it's PTSD that I'm feeling, but it was definitely a very stressful situation. So working for a global company, we had global customers. And at the time, there was a global conflict going on. And our customers, again, they're global. So we've got customers representing both sides of the conflict. And we had posted something on the website, and this was part of an organization that I was over, which was posted very innocently. There was no bad intentions at all. And this just made it onto the website and actually wasn't caught for a few weeks until someone noticed it, who the thing that was expressed on the website was in opposition to what they felt during this conflict. And it caused a very big uproar, and to the point where customers were threatening to leave the company. And I went back, we spent weeks talking to these customers. We had our government relations people, we had our attorneys. It was a really big deal. And at the time in my mind, I was like, oh, this was the person who had posted it on the website, who had approved it. I didn't think that I had been involved at all. And then I went back and I found out that I had reviewed the post. And again, it was very unintentional, the wording, and it was something that we weren't aware of at the time. But like I said, it caused a stir. And so once I realized that this did fall on me, it wasn't my fault. I remember calling my boss. It was close to Christmas. Everyone was out and about, and not as many people were in the office. And I was in the office that day, and I was like, just so you know. And I actually broke down crying, which is something I don't do very often. But because of how much stress I've been under, it was literally 3 weeks of just solid stress and talking and trying to figure out these situations. I broke down and I was like, I just found that I am responsible for this. Like, this is my fault. And as we're talking through this, my boss said, oh, Misty, I am so sorry you're feeling the way that you feel right now. I don't feel like I have been supportive enough of you in this situation. She had been taking care of some other issues, and so she hadn't been as involved with all of this from the beginning. And so she took some of the responsibility on herself, and she was like, this is not you. And I don't want you to leave, because I was telling her, if you want my resignation, I will give it to you now. And just telling her that and getting that off my back, and then having her respond so kindly, that made a huge difference. It didn't help resolve the situation. And we did spend many more hours and times talking to people, coming up with a retraction for the website, which had to be delicately worded. And again, it involved so many people and so many man hours. And I felt guilty for that I was wasting people's time, especially this close to Christmas. But just the fact that my boss was so kind about it and like acknowledged to me, this is not your fault. This is a combination of many other things. And these customers, she was like, that they were on their way out anyways. They were planning on leaving. They just needed something to use as why they were leaving, as a scapegoat, I guess. So that's my story.
I think there's some really interesting things in here. And then I'd love to get into some of the principles that as you think about it, you think, man, if you've had a big moment, what do you do? So one of the things when we were talking about this before, as we were preparing, I thought one of the things that is really a valuable leadership lesson comes from both you and your leader. For you, and I think we all have these moments, nobody gets up and says, today I think I'd love to blow up my career. It feels like a good day to do that. I don't know anyone who thinks that. Everybody has good intention. And my sense is that you didn't even, it's not that we don't realize what we read, but we have so many things that go by us that we don't, we're doing our best. We think we're doing what we're supposed to. And when you realize that you had been involved, you took ownership. I think the other thing that was really interesting that you shared, just as we were preparing, I've thought about this, that your leader had this kind of bird's eye view and big enough to be able to say, sure, Misty was involved. And there were a lot of other things in play here, which I think is so important to be able as a leader to say, you didn't intend to do that. And let's talk about the support of working your way through this. And this is a very different scenario, then, I remember this story from the 1980s or early 90s where Bobby Knight, a basketball coach, threw a chair across the court. That wouldn't be tolerated at any moment, especially these days. And so I really appreciate from this story, from both sides, the willingness to take ownership, and then also the how level-headed your manager was in being able to step back and not just say, "Oh my gosh, we have a scapegoat. This is great." So,
Yeah.
what are some of the other things that you, as you have had this experience, that you have learned and that you would pass along to someone if they have a big doozy moment?
I I think, just as you had acknowledged, first of all, addressing it, it doesn't do any good to sit there and let it be like, "Oh my gosh, I did this. I'm not going to tell anyone," or I'm just going to let it stew in my head. Just acknowledging your error and whatever the consequences are that follow, accepting those and getting past that. I Once I had that discussion with her, and yes, no, I mean, if she would have said, "Okay, you're fired," or "We're going to use you as a scapegoat," I still at least would have felt peace with myself for acknowledging it and taking the blame for it if that's what I had to do. I think other principles are bring in your team members. And I guess not everyone was as lucky as I was in this situation to have had such a good boss and to have had such a great support network. The attorneys we were working with and the government relations people, everyone was just wonderful and so kind and so patient. And it really showed to me the value of having a good team. And as I look forward and as I look for people to hire or anything like that, you want to look for people who can work well as a team and especially under stressful situations like that.
Yeah. And we do work in a global environment. So it does seem that we have a lot more scenarios the companies and leaders are needing to be careful of. Even within teams, even on us in a small company, you can have people who are it can feel very polarized and people have very strong feelings about things. Can you talk with us? You mentioned that you had done a lot of work in managing the scenario. What are some of the things that you and your team did to manage the scenario? You met with lawyers, but what are some of the other things that you were doing to say, okay, we need to manage this and respond to the customers and the situation?
So we did a lot of listening. We talked to people on both sides of the situation, those who had very loud voices and very strong opinions. We spent hours talking to them, going through the situation, listening to their concerns. And as we drafted our response, we took their concerns into consideration. In the end, the actual response that we ended up sharing was something that those people with the loud voices, they weren't totally happy with, but it was the right response to give. I do think, especially in a situation like this where it's global and you have two different sides, that listening and letting people know that you care about their opinions is very important. Yeah, just it was a very highly charged situation.
Yeah. You've reminded me of the importance of even just being able to say, I'm sorry. I think that is such a simple phrase to be able to say, I'm sorry, it impacted you. How can we be supportive? What can we do? As hard as that may be sometimes, or as simple as that message may be, there is quality and value in that. As we wrap up this particular story, do you have any messages of hope or encouragement to someone who is maybe hearing this on the day of or the day after, or they're waiting their way through?
Yeah, I can say that as time goes on, it gets better. And this too will pass. It may not seem like it in the moment, but if you are in that moment, I know one thing I learned going through this process, especially living by myself, being a single woman, I would tell my family about it. My parents live close by, and I was grateful for their support through it. But I know coming home, like during the week after these intense discussions, to a quiet house, I've always appreciated my quiet house. It was very peaceful, but it's those moments where you just start getting caught up in the situation. You keep replaying things in your brain, and there's no one there for you to talk to. And I would encourage those who are in that situation right now to pick up the phone, and maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a coworker, but make sure to talk through it, and also take time to do some self-care as well. And I know I am a big person with I'm really big on keeping my habits and my schedule, and especially during the week, I make sure to get to bed at a good time, and I get up and run in the mornings. And really, that's very therapeutic for me. It may not be for everyone. Find those things that will help calm you down and help calm your brain down, so you're not stewing over the situation when you're by yourself.
It's such an honest response. And I think about this relative to, I think, mistakes that I made. So it'd be really easy for me to sit here and play the perfect host and say, oh, I coach people and I've never made a mistake. That's not true. In fact, I don't know anybody who's had a perfect career where they don't regret sending an email. I certainly have had moments. In fact, I had a big doozy, which actually impacted me professionally in terms of where I could progress. And that was really hard. And everything that you're saying right now has so much value in terms of sometimes you're able to work your way through it. Sometimes you don't. And there's the impact. And then the question becomes, what do you do and how do you move forward? This actually sets us up really well for one of the things that we had talked about, which is career flexibility. And when I started talking with people about the podcast, there was this question that I would ask people, which was, what do you wish someone would have told you when you got started professionally? And Misty, you had such a great answer. I would love if you would share what you've learned about career flexibility.
So I studied, I was liberal arts. I know you said communications, and I'm like, oh, I should have also said I was humanities major and I minored in communication. so I remember thinking, what am I going to do with my life? Growing up, I had all these plans. I'm like, oh, I'm going to be an interior decorator. And then I worked for someone who had interior decorators. And I was like, oh, no, there's no way I could deal with people that way. And I love the arts. I love music. I love all of that. But I'm like, but is that really going to be a career for me? I appreciate them. I'm not talented enough to do them myself. And so once I got out of college, my first job, I moved to Boston and I worked as an Office of Student Life Coordinator at Harvard Divinity School. And it was a great job and I had so much fun, but I was like, this is not my career. And then I went to grad school. And after grad school, I moved to Washington, D.C. and got a job at a nonprofit. And then I didn't seem to be going anywhere with that. And then I got into government consulting. And that took me to some interesting places. I learned so much. I was working in strategic communications. And then it was time for me to move back to Utah. This is home for me. And I was like, what am I going to do in Utah? After working for the government and working in these interesting places. And the job I was able to get here was with an MLM company, a multi-level marketing company. And I was like, how did I end up with it at an MLM? And I feel like in Utah, you've got the tech sector and then you've got MLMs. And it was interesting. I worked as the director of communications there, and that company started to kind of fall. And so then I had to be like, okay, well, what am I going to do next? And when I moved to Utah, I had it in the back of my mind that I didn't want to go back to a nonprofit, but I wanted to do something with corporate social responsibility. That was becoming a big buzzword at the time. And I was like, how do I do that? How do I get to a position like that? And so it took a while. And once I moved on from this first MLM, I had a friend who was like, hey, there's an opening at Doterra, and it was in their PR department. and I managed to get hired. And a year later, I was able to move into this position with Doterra Healing Hands, which was exactly where I wanted to be. So the moral of that very long story is my job, like my career has taken me down many twists and turns. They've been very different. And with each change, I have had to pivot. Some of those were pivots that I chose to make, and others were not. But with each of them, when I moved on to consulting for the government, I had kind of had a plan in the back of my head. That was probably the direction I wanted to go. And so it was just a matter of finding the right in. And usually that has been through a person, a connection. And so networking has been very important as part of this process. But it's always good to keep in the back of your mind, like, where would you like to be? Because for those fortunate people who get into a career and they stay there, their entire life and they progress through different levels of it, I think that's so great and that's so comforting that you're able to do it. But I don't think in this world today that many people are, and that you are going to be working in a lot of different areas and doing a lot of different things. And in the end, it's really not a bad thing because you get to learn a lot of things and meet different people and have new experiences.
I appreciate the real honesty of saying sometimes you wanted to make the choice and sometimes you didn't want to make the choice to move on. That decision was made for you. And those can be really hard moments when you think, I didn't think that was going to be the path that I was going to take. One of the things that stands out to me that you're sharing is that you've taken these moments and still made it a good pivot for yourself, even though it wasn't
Hopefully.
easy.
No, I have. So yeah, sometimes I'm like, was this the right move to make?
So how have you known if it would be a good pivot? What are some of the principles that, as you look back, you think, oh, this is what has helped me make it a good pivot? And maybe it's because it is a great pivot, and maybe it's because you just decided to make it the great pivot by choice.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of it has come down to prayer, of course, prayer and asking Heavenly Father, what should I be doing? And sometimes the answer has been there, sometimes it hasn't. And sometimes there have been opportunities that have fallen into my lap, just like working for this MLM company in Utah. That fell into my lap. And like I said earlier, I was like, really, this is what my life has brought me to. But because of that opportunity, it opened up this opportunity for me at Doterra. That was a great stepping stone for me. And so I think it really is, you've got to be open to things, even if they're not what you expect them to be, because usually that is something that will more than likely take you to the next level and kind of put you in the direction you want to be going.
I also really like that sometimes the path wasn't direct. I'm thinking about when you stepped into your first MLM, and I think you said you were in PR, and it wasn't quite where you wanted to go, but you were willing to take that path that was going to take a little bit more time, which I think is a great principle as I think about people I know who want to pivot. And it can feel really easy to say, but no, I want to be there right now. And sometimes it takes a little bit of work, or starting over at a different level, or starting in a place where you didn't think that you wanted to be. Do you have any other advice that you would share or counsel that you would share with people who want to pivot?
I think the first piece of advice is just to be patient. I'm definitely not a patient person. And all these pivots that I've made in my life, I think is the Lord saying, hey, is that you're being taught patience? Because something perfect may fall into your lap, but usually you do have to kind of meander a little bit and see what happens. So that's my first piece of advice. Be patient. And then network. That, like I mentioned before, that is something that has really been able to get me to places where I wanted to go, are people that I know, and sometimes unexpected people. I remember when I got my job with Booz Allen, it was just a party at church. and just talking to a girl I didn't know very well. And she didn't even work for Booz Allen, but she was like, you should apply there. She's like, I know someone who can work there. I'm going to connect you to. And just be open to talking to people and let them know what you're looking for and that you may need a change. And I promise you'll get results from that. So I'd hate putting myself out there like that. And sometimes you don't even need to put yourself out there. You just need to mention that you're interested in something and you'll see things happen.
I remember sitting in it was a women's group, and there was someone who was a venture capitalist who was speaking, and he talked about the importance of this. That a woman said to him, "This is where I want to go professionally." And until that point in time, he'd had no idea. But once he knew that, he felt like he could advocate for her, and he started looking for opportunities. So this idea of telling people what you want, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and you put it out there to the universe. I hear lots of people say that, and I do think that there is truth to that. Put that energy out there.
On this kind of hopeful note, you have put it out there that you wanted to be in a role where you could do corporate giving, corporate responsibility, I think was the phrase you used. And so you've ended up in a role that uses a lot of your talents. You've done the work, you've been patient, and you've had these moments that are really tough, but have you also had moments that have been joyful? Has this use of your talents or the career brought you joy?
Yes, for sure it's brought me joy. Like I said, one of the great things about pivoting, and I wouldn't even say I'm a complete extrovert. My Myers-Briggs, I test right on the border of introvert and extrovert. I do love being around people and learning from people. And so I guess I'm definitely on the extrovert side of things, but just talking and learning, and especially people from all over the world. I love talking to people from different countries and then talking about strengths. There's something called the Strengths Finder. My number one strength is context. And I think that's why I like to talk to people and understand where they're coming from and their background. And so I've had a lot of opportunities to do that throughout my career, whether it's been with members of the military or working with people. When I worked for the State Department, I worked with people in different countries, just talking with them. In my volunteer positions, it's been the same way. I seem to be the person that likes to seek out people who are from outside the United States. And in my current job, that's uh, uh, a lot of what I do is I do build relationships with people all over the world. And like I said, I think that is a strength of mine, is that I love talking to them. I love learning from them. I feel like when you learn about a culture and you can talk to someone about it, they're more prone to open up to you and be friends with you. And that's been that's been a part of my career that's been a huge blessing for me.
It also strikes me that it takes a lot of confidence to do that. And I would love to look at this from a perspective of the work that you do in a volunteer setting. You've had a lot of volunteer leadership roles at church. And I guess the context I would say is that in our church and our faith, all of the positions are volunteer positions. So everybody has different strengths, everybody has different talents, every team has different dynamics. We're always hopefully working to be unified teams. And sometimes it's probably easier to speak up than other times, I imagine. Has it been hard for you to speak up, or have there been things that people do that has actually helped you feel confident in speaking up in those scenarios that maybe aren't as easy?
Yeah, as you were saying this, I went back to what I said previously about loving to talk to people. And I'm like, I really am someone who inside, like I just want to curl football because I do have a hard time putting myself out there sometimes. But once I've done some background work, like I said, studying, learning about a culture, that gives me confidence to go and approach someone and start talking to them. And that's the same with my church positions. I've served in a variety of capacities, and I have served in what is probably one of the most challenging capacities for a woman in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that's Relief Society president. You're the president of the women's organization at church. And this is a situation where you're in a lot of meetings. Oftentimes, those meetings are mostly men, especially at the times where I've served. It's been me and then a room full of men. And so speaking up and using my voice wasn't always easy. But in those situations, what I realized is that I was there to help the women that I basically represented. And a lot of these women had needs. And so it was up to me to be their voice and to speak up for them. And I think that's what gave me the confidence is when I realized it's not about me. This is about trying to help other people. And so if things start being said and I don't agree with them, I will use my voice and voice that opinion that I don't agree and try to be as prepared as possible to offer other resolutions or other solutions.
Two things that really stand out to me are the importance of coming in prepared, learning the situations. And I'm thinking about that as you talk about the women that you are representing, that you really are there in a volunteer service capacity to support them and their lives. And that means you have to know them. You've clearly taken the time to get to know them. How do you do that? When you have 80, 100 women that you are supporting and trying to get to know, how do you get to the point that you feel like you know them well enough to be able to say, this is a great idea. Thank you all for sharing that. And I have a different take. Here's some of the needs that the women have in the organization.
Oh, wow. That's really depends. Some people are much easier to get to know than others. I do know that the last time I was Relief Society president, I lived in an apartment complex, which was ever revolving. People moving in and people moving out. Once I saw a name pop up on the roll, I would go over there and drop something off to them and just introduce myself to them, just so that they felt comfortable and knew that I was there. And there were some people that responded to that very well. I'd let them know where church was at. But there were others that didn't respond to that. I also found that there are certain people, they may not respond very well to me, but they responded well to one of my counselors or someone within the Relief Society presidency, or even someone that I just knew in the Relief Society. And I would work through them to learn what their needs were. In our church, we have what we call ministering sisters. And there were some who were just phenomenal. And again, they were able to reach out to certain people better than I was as the president. And so that was really how I got to know people and learned what their needs were.
Really not relying on yourself when you
Yes.
are in these volunteer capacities. Do you have any kind of final notes about that before we wrap up and head into a message of support that you would want to share?
I think with this one, it really is being in a leadership position in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or any congregation. It's a difficult thing. And when you're new and you don't know what you're doing, I would recommend to reach out to people. Usually there are people who have been in the same position that you are. Reach out to them and ask for advice. Within our church, we also have people at a little higher level called the stake. Reach out to your counterpart at the stake and just search for mentors and people you can ask questions to and get support from.
It's so interesting to think of this from the perspective of where we started, which is making big mistake. And you really did talk about how your team became such a huge support for you. So I love this thread that's come through here as the value of people helping you, both as you navigate challenges, but you also talked about it with career flexibility in terms of building those relationships and having that network that could provide support for you. And then even now in a volunteer setting, really a lot of this is allowing other people to help you get to know the needs of what other people are doing and leveraging that full support So you're not sitting alone. It reminds me of the story that you shared earlier of, yeah, it's really nice sometimes to have our cozy place, our comfortable place. And also, we need to allow other people to support and help us through those moments. As we always do, we like to give a chance to you to end with a message of hope or encouragement. What message of hope or encouragement would you give to people to help them get their day started off on the right foot, or encourage them in that moment where they have faced a big doozy moment?
I would say learn how to forgive yourself. That's something I struggle with often. And especially when you do make mistakes, it's often hard to let those things go. But it's just with any type of forgiveness in life, it's what Christ taught us about forgiving others. Just as we need to forgive others, we need to forgive ourselves of what we've done. And I had a coach who taught me something that has come in very handy in the last, year or so since I learned the method, and that it's called dump and fill. And you write down all the negative feelings and about a situation that you're having. And you could take up pages, you could take up just a couple sentences, but just getting those emotions and feelings out, and then rip up the paper or burn it and say, these feelings don't control me. And then you write down everything that you're grateful for and fill up that empty space in your mind with good and positive things. And I think we need to do that, especially as women. I feel like we get really hard on ourselves and we just need to let things go. And when we do that, we are able to move forward and progress. If we don't do it, we're not able to progress. So forgive yourself. You're great. And whatever situation you're in right now, it'll pass.
Thank you so much for your message today, Misty. And thank you to everybody who has listened. As always, subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or on your favorite listening app. And please remember to share this podcast with others if you feel like it can help them. Lastly, don't forget to sign up for the podcast email at www.calltotheworkforce.com, where you can learn about new episodes. Have a great day.